What they don't know is that with one phone call, you could buy their entire world and destroy it just as easily. That's exactly what happened to me, and I'm about to tell you how I turned the tables on the most arrogant family I'd ever met. My name is Rosalind Murphy, and I'm 52 years old. For the past 22 months, I've been working as a housekeeper for the Pemberton family in their massive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. To them, I was just the help. Someone who cleaned their toilets, did their laundry, and stayed invisible while they lived their fancy lives. But what the Pembertons didn't know was that I was worth $847 million. Yeah, you heard that right. $847 million. More money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. And I was scrubbing their floors every Tuesday and Thursday, watching them treat me like dirt, waiting for the perfect moment to show them exactly who they were messing with. Let me back up and tell you how this whole crazy situation started. It was November 8th, 2022, when I first knocked on the Pemberton family's front door. I wasn't looking for work because I needed the money. I was looking for something much more important than that. I was looking for my daughter. See, 28 years ago, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Emma. I was 19 years old, broke and scared, living in a tiny apartment in Hartford with no family and no support. The adoption agency told me they'd found the perfect family for her. Rich people who could give her everything I couldn't. The Pembertons seemed like a fairy tale come true. Big house, successful business, everything a little girl could want. What happened next changed my life forever, but not in the way you might think. Just 3 weeks after I signed those adoption papers, my great-uncle Marcus died in a mining accident in Colorado. I barely knew him, but his lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited his small mining company. I figured it would be worth maybe a few $1,000s, enough to help me get back on my feet and maybe start college. But when the lawyers finished going through Uncle Marcus's paperwork, they discovered something incredible. His little mining company actually owned the mineral rights to one of the largest copper and rare earth deposits in North America. Within 6 months, I went from being a broke teenage mother to being worth over $20 million. The first thing I did was try to get Emma back. I hired the best family lawyers money could buy, but they gave me devastating news. The adoption was completely legal, final, and sealed. Emma was already bonded with her new family, and trying to reverse the adoption would require proving the Pembertons were unfit parents, which they clearly weren't. The courts told me that disrupting Emma's life would only hurt her, and they were right. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I let her go and focused on building my business. I threw myself into work like a woman possessed, partly because I loved the challenge, but mostly because it was the only thing that kept me from thinking about my daughter every single minute of every day. Over the next 27 years, Murphy Mining Corporation grew into one of the most successful companies in America. We discovered 3 more major mineral deposits, expanded into oil and natural gas extraction in Texas and North Dakota, and eventually moved into renewable energy technology. By 2010, I was worth over $100 million. By 2015, it was $300 million. By 2020, I'd crossed the $500 million mark. But success came with a price. The mining industry is dangerous, and I lost good people in accidents over the years. Every time someone got hurt or killed working for my company, I felt responsible. That's when I started investing heavily in safety technology and renewable energy. I wanted to build a business empire that created value without destroying lives or the environment. By 2022, Murphy Mining Corporation was worth $1.2 billion, making me personally worth about $847 million. I owned copper mines in Colorado and Arizona, oil wells in Texas and North Dakota, solar panel manufacturing facilities in Nevada and California, and had major investments in wind farms across the Midwest. But I never stopped thinking about Emma. Every birthday, every Christmas, every major holiday, I wondered what she looked like, what kind of person she'd become, whether she was happy. I hired private investigators over the years, but they could never find much information because of privacy laws around adoption records. Then, in October 2022, I got my breakthrough. One of my investigators discovered something the others had missed. When Emma turned 18 in 2014, Connecticut law allowed her to request non-identifying information about her birth parents. The investigator found a clerk at the adoption agency who remembered processing Emma's request. While the clerk couldn't give me Emma's contact information, she accidentally let slip that Emma was working as a teacher somewhere in Fairfield County. From there, it was just a matter of checking employment records for every school district in the area. Within 2 weeks, I found Emma Pemberton working as a third-grade teacher at Greenwich Elementary School. After 27 years, I finally knew where my daughter was. I could have just shown up at her door and told her who I was. I could have hired the best lawyers in the country and fought to reconnect with her. But something told me to be careful. Something told me to learn about the family who'd raised her before I made my move. So, I spent 3 weeks researching the Pembertons and creating a plan. What I discovered wasn't pretty. Richard Pemberton's tech company was failing. They were drowning in debt, and they were putting on a fake show of wealth they couldn't afford. But they were still Emma's family, and I needed to understand what kind of people they really were. I hired a company that specializes in creating background identities for undercover investigators and corporate security. It cost me $150,000, but they created a completely legal identity for me as Rosalind Murphy from Hartford, using my real first name but creating a fictional work history as a housekeeper for wealthy families. They built employment records, tax documents, even references from families who'd allegedly moved out of state. The identity was technically legal because it was built around real documents and a real person, me, just with some details changed to protect my true business identity. It's the same kind of thing companies use when they need executives to investigate employee theft or corporate espionage without revealing who they really are. I applied to be the Pemberton family's housekeeper in November 2022, telling them I was a widow who needed work to supplement my small pension. They hired me after a brief interview, probably because I was willing to work for $400 a week, which was much less than their previous housekeeper. From day one, I could see exactly what kind of people the Pembertons were. Richard Pemberton, the father, was a loud, arrogant man who thought money made him better than everyone else, even though he was secretly broke. His wife, Miranda, was just as bad, always talking about their breeding and their standards like they were royalty or something. Their son, Garrett, was 25 and the worst of all of them. Entitled, mean, and completely obsessed with making sure everyone knew how important his family was. And then there was Emma. My beautiful, sweet Emma, who is now 28 years old and worked as a teacher at the local elementary school. She was everything I'd hoped she'd become. Kind, smart, caring about others. But I could see how they treated her sometimes, like she should be grateful for everything they'd given her. Like she owed them something for saving her from her terrible birth mother. It broke my heart to watch, but I knew I needed to be patient. I needed to understand the whole situation before I did anything that might hurt Emma or push her away from me forever. What I discovered during those 22 months was even worse than I'd expected. The Pembertons weren't just arrogant and rude. They were also completely fake. Their tech company was failing, they were drowning in debt, and they were months behind on their mortgage payments. But they kept spending money they didn't have and acting like they were wealthy. I learned all this because rich people think their housekeepers are invisible. They left financial documents on their desks, had loud phone conversations about money problems, and complained about their debts right in front of me like I wasn't even there. Over 22 months, I got a complete picture of their real financial situation. Richard would complain about having to pay the help, while Miranda would talk about how hard it was to find good service these days. Garrett was the worst, always making comments about how people from my background should be grateful for any work they could get. But the thing that really got to me was how they talked about Emma's adoption. Like they'd done this amazing charity work by taking in a poor, unwanted baby. Like Emma should spend her whole life being thankful that they'd rescued her from poverty and shame. They had no idea that Emma's birth mother had been frantically searching for her for 28 years. They had no idea that I'd built a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, partly because I'd thrown myself into work to deal with the pain of losing my child. They thought I was just some poor old lady who needed their money to survive. While I was working for them, I also hired a team of financial investigators to dig deeper into their records. When you have my kind of money, you can legally access a lot of information through credit reports, public records, and business filings. What I discovered was that they owed over $340,000 in credit card debt. Their business was about to go bankrupt, and they were 4 months behind on their mortgage payments. The bank that held their mortgage, First National Bank, was already starting foreclosure proceedings. In Connecticut, the foreclosure process takes about 18 months, and the Pembertons were about 6 months into that process. They were trying to keep it secret, but the legal filings were public record. I also discovered something that gave me the perfect opportunity for revenge. The bank was planning to auction off their mortgage along with several other defaulted loans. In July 2024, I had one of my investment companies participate in that auction. For $1.4 million, I bought the right to collect on the Pembertons' $2.8 million mortgage debt. They had no idea that their monthly payments were now supposed to be going directly to me, because they'd stopped making payments months earlier anyway. Everything changed on September 23, 2024. That was the day of Garrett's wedding to his fiancée, a stuck-up woman named Vivian, who was just as awful as he was. They'd planned this huge, expensive celebration at their house, with over 200 guests and enough fancy food to feed a small town. I was supposed to work that day, helping serve food and clean up after all their rich friends. I didn't mind. Actually, I was looking forward to it. I'd been planning something special for months, and this wedding was going to be the perfect opportunity to finally show the Pemberton family exactly who they'd been messing with. The wedding was everything you'd expect from people like them. Over the top, flashy, and designed to show off how much money they could spend. The backyard was decorated with thousands of white flowers, there was a 12-piece orchestra, and the catering bill alone probably cost more than most people make in a year. What they didn't know was that they'd paid for this wedding with money they didn't have. I'd seen the credit card statements and loan documents. This celebration was going to bankrupt them completely, but they were too proud to admit they couldn't afford it. I spent the morning helping set up, wearing my usual black uniform and staying invisible while the family got ready for their big day. Emma looked beautiful in her bridesmaid dress, but I could see the stress on her face. She'd been working extra hours at school to help pay for some of the wedding expenses because the family was short on cash, even though they'd never admit it. Around 2 p.m., the guests started arriving. Politicians, business owners, society people who all acted like they were at some royal wedding instead of watching a spoiled brat marry another spoiled brat. I served drinks and appetizers, listening to their conversations about their vacation homes and their expensive cars and their children at private schools. But I had a secret weapon that none of them knew about. 6 months earlier, I'd been featured in Forbes magazine as one of America's most successful self-made women. The article had included photos of me at my corporate headquarters in Denver and details about my business empire. I'd also done an interview with Channel 8 News about women in business leadership, specifically talking about my expansion into renewable energy. Most people who read Forbes or watch local business news wouldn't recognize a billionaire CEO working as a housekeeper. But Jennifer Martinez, the reporter who'd interviewed me, would definitely remember my face if she saw me again. Especially since I'd told her during that interview that I was always looking for opportunities to teach people about treating workers with respect. The ceremony itself was at 4 p.m. in the backyard. I watched from the kitchen window as Garrett and Vivian exchanged vows that sounded more like business contracts than promises of love. Emma stood next to the bride, smiling and playing her part perfectly, even though I could tell she wasn't really happy. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the reception area for dinner and dancing. This was where things started to get interesting. I was serving champagne when I overheard Garrett talking to a group of his college friends near the bar. You know, Garrett was saying, loud enough for half the party to hear, Emma's always been weird about money. She acts like she's too good to ask for help, even though she knows we saved her from a life of poverty. His friends laughed, and Vivian joined the conversation with her new husband. It's so funny how adopted kids sometimes get these ideas about being independent, she said, sipping her champagne. Like they forget where they came from. Emma was standing nearby, talking to some family friends, but I could see her face change when she heard those comments. She looked hurt and embarrassed, but she didn't say anything. She just smiled and kept talking like nothing had happened. That's when Garrett really crossed the line. He raised his voice even louder and pointed in my direction. See that woman over there serving drinks? That's Rosalind, our housekeeper. She's been with us for 22 months now. Everyone turned to look at me, and I felt their eyes judging my uniform, my graying hair, my humble appearance. I kept my face neutral and continued serving, but inside I was getting ready for what was about to happen. She's just a maid, Garrett continued, laughing like he'd said something hilarious. But she works hard, and she knows her place. That's the difference between people like her and people like us. We understand that everyone has their role in life. The group laughed again, and I saw several guests nodding in agreement. To them, I was just another piece of furniture, something to be used and forgotten about. They had no idea they were looking at someone who could buy their entire neighborhood without thinking twice about it. But Emma looked mortified. She walked over to where Garrett was standing and quietly said, "That's not a nice way to talk about Rosalind. She's a good person who works really hard." Garrett just laughed louder. "Oh, come on, Emma. Don't be so sensitive. I'm not being mean. I'm just telling the truth. She's the help. That's what she does. That's who she is." "She's just a maid," he repeated, making sure everyone could hear him. "Nothing wrong with that, but let's not pretend she's anything more than what she is." That was it. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. 22 months of planning, 22 months of watching this arrogant family treat people like dirt, and now they were humiliating me in front of 200 of their closest friends and family. I walked over to where the bride and groom were standing, still carrying my tray of champagne glasses. My hands were steady, my voice was calm, and my heart was pounding with excitement for what was about to happen. "Excuse me, Mr. Garrett," I said politely, just like I always did. "I need to step outside for a moment to take a phone call. Is that all right with you?" Garrett waved me away, without even looking at me. "Yeah, sure, whatever. Just make sure you're back in time to start cleaning up." I walked to the back garden, away from the crowd, but still close enough that my voice would carry. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd programmed weeks earlier. "Channel 8 News, this is Jennifer Martinez," came the voice on the other end. "Hi Jennifer, this is Rosalind Murphy. You interviewed me 6 months ago about my business empire and my expansion into renewable energy." There was a pause, and I could hear Jennifer's excitement through the phone. "Oh my God, Ms. Murphy. I remember you perfectly. You're the CEO of Murphy Mining Corporation. We've been trying to reach you for a follow-up story about your solar energy projects." "Well, I'm at a family event right now, and I think this might be the perfect time for that follow-up interview. I'm at 847 Maple Ridge Drive in Greenwich. It's a wedding reception, and I think your viewers would be very interested in this story." "Are you serious? You want to do the interview today?" "I want to do it right now. And Jennifer, remember when I told you in our last interview that I was always looking for opportunities to teach people about treating workers with respect? Well, I think I've found the perfect teachable moment. Jennifer's voice got even more excited. We can be there in an hour. This is incredible, Ms. Murphy. Can you give me any hint about what the story will be? Let's just say it's about the importance of never underestimating people based on their appearance or their job title. I gave her a few more details, hung up the phone, and walked back toward the reception area. A few people had heard bits of my conversation, and I could see them whispering to each other with confused looks on their faces. The news crew arrived exactly 58 minutes later. I was back in the kitchen, waiting and watching, when I heard car doors slamming in the front driveway. Through the window, I could see the Channel 8 news van with its big satellite dish and the logo that everyone in Connecticut recognized instantly. Jennifer Martinez came to the front door with her cameraman and sound technician. She was a well-known reporter who'd been covering business and society news for over 15 years. When she asked to speak to Rosalind Murphy, Miranda Pemberton looked completely confused. "I think there's been some mistake," Miranda said, standing in the doorway in her expensive mother-of-the-groom dress. "We have a housekeeper named Rosalind, but surely that's not who you're looking for." "Actually," I said, walking up behind her and removing my apron, "that's exactly who she's looking for." Miranda turned around and stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. "Rosalind? What is this about? Why are there news people here?" Jennifer smiled and looked directly at me. "Ms. Murphy, thank you so much for agreeing to this follow-up interview. Our viewers have been fascinated by your story ever since our segment about successful businesswomen in Connecticut. How has your renewable energy expansion been going?" The word businesswoman hit the wedding reception like a bomb going off. Conversation stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips, and every single person in that backyard turned to stare at the kitchen doorway where I was standing with the news crew. "I'm sorry," Miranda said, her voice getting higher and more confused, "but I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is Rosalind, our housekeeper. She's worked for our family for 22 months. Jennifer looked at Miranda with a kind of professional smile that news reporters use when they're about to deliver information that's going to shock someone. "Ma'am, you're absolutely right that this is Rosalind Murphy, your housekeeper. But she's also the founder and CEO of Murphy Mining Corporation, one of the largest privately owned companies in North America. According to Forbes magazine, she's worth approximately $847 million. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. You could literally hear the wind blowing through the trees and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. Every single wedding guest was frozen in place, staring at me like I was some kind of alien who'd just landed in their backyard. Garrett was holding a wine glass halfway to his mouth, his face completely white. Vivian looked like someone had just told her the world was ending. Richard and Miranda were standing there with their mouths open, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke. But the best part, the absolutely perfect part, was watching Emma's face as she slowly understood what was happening. I could see her brilliant mind putting the pieces together, figuring out that the quiet housekeeper she'd been kind to for 22 months was actually one of the richest women in the country. "Ms. Murphy," Jennifer continued, "can you tell our viewers why you've been working as a housekeeper when you're worth nearly $1 billion? I looked directly at the camera, and then I looked at the Pemberton family, and then I smiled the biggest, most satisfied smile of my entire life. "Well, Jennifer, 22 months ago, I came to work for this family because I was looking for someone very important to me. Someone I'd been searching for since 1996. You see, 28 years ago, I was a young mother who made the hardest decision of my life. I gave my baby daughter up for adoption because I thought I couldn't provide for her properly." Emma's face went completely white. She was smart enough to know exactly where the story was going, and I could see her hands starting to shake. "The adoption agency told me they'd found the perfect family for my daughter. Rich, successful people who could give her everything I couldn't. What I didn't know was that just 3 weeks later, I would inherit my great-uncle's mining business, which would eventually make me one of the wealthiest women in America. I paused, letting that information sink in for everyone who was listening. The wedding guests were completely silent, hanging on every word like they were watching the most dramatic movie of their lives. I spent years trying to find my daughter, but the adoption was sealed. All I knew was that her new family had named her Emma Pemberton and that they lived somewhere in Connecticut. Emma made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. I could see tears starting to form in her eyes as she realized that everything she'd been told about her birth mother was a lie. So, 22 months ago, I decided to take a job as the Pemberton family's housekeeper. I wanted to get to know my daughter and the people who'd raised her before I revealed who I really was. I wanted to see what kind of family they were, what kind of values they had, how they treated the people around them. Garrett's wine glass slipped from his fingers and crashed to the ground, spreading red wine across the expensive white tablecloth. He was staring at me like I was a ghost, probably remembering every nasty comment he'd ever made about the help while I was standing right there listening. And what I discovered, I continued, my voice getting stronger and more confident, was a family that thinks money makes them better than other people. A family that looks down on anyone who serves them, anyone who works for them, anyone they consider beneath their social status. I turned to look directly at Garrett, who was now breathing like he'd just run a marathon. Just a few minutes ago, your son told everyone at this wedding that I was just a maid and that I knew my place. He thought it was funny to humiliate someone he believed was poor and powerless. The camera was capturing every second of this, and I knew that by tomorrow morning, this video would be all over social media and the evening news. The Pemberton family was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. By now, about half the wedding guests had quietly started leaving. Some looked uncomfortable with the family drama they'd stumbled into. Others were probably rushing home to start spreading the gossip. But the ones who stayed were completely mesmerized by what they were witnessing. The truth is, I said, looking directly at Emma, I'm not just a maid. I'm your birth mother, Emma. I'm the woman who's been looking for you for 28 years. I'm the woman who built a business empire worth nearly $1 billion, partly because losing you motivated me to work harder than I ever thought possible. Emma started crying then, big tears rolling down her cheeks, while she stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, which, in a way, she was. Jennifer stepped forward with follow-up questions. Ms. Murphy, this is an incredible story. Can you provide documentation to support these claims? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared weeks earlier. I have copies of my business documents here, my Forbes profile, and most importantly, copies of the adoption paperwork from 1996 that show Emma's original birth certificate with my name as her mother. I handed the folder to Jennifer, who began looking through the documents with her cameraman filming over her shoulder. These appear to be legitimate legal documents, she said to the camera. Business incorporation papers, adoption records, and birth certificates that show a clear timeline from 1996 to today. More guests were leaving now. Probably about 30 people had quietly slipped away during the revelation. The ones who remained seemed torn between fascination and discomfort, but nobody could look away. There's something else your viewers should know, Jennifer. I continued. The Pemberton family has been living a lie. They're not wealthy at all. They're actually drowning in debt and about to lose this house to foreclosure. That hit the remaining crowd like another bomb. I could see people pulling out their phones, probably to start texting their friends about what they were witnessing. How do you know that, Ms. Murphy? Jennifer asked. Because I now own their mortgage. Last month, I bought their debt from the bank that was about to foreclose on this property. They owe $2.8 million, and they haven't made a payment in 4 months. Richard finally found his voice. This is impossible, he stammered. You're a housekeeper. You work for us. This has to be some kind of elaborate hoax. Jennifer smiled and held up her tablet. Actually, sir, I can verify Ms. Murphy's identity right here. She's definitely the CEO of Murphy Mining Corporation, and her business holdings are well documented. That won't be necessary to show, I said calmly. I think everyone here gets the picture. By now, we were down to maybe 40 wedding guests, and even some of them were looking toward the exits. The family drama had completely overshadowed what was supposed to be a celebration. I walked over to where Emma was standing, still crying and looking completely overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Gently, I took her hands in mine. Emma, sweetheart, I know this is a lot to process. I know you probably have a million questions, and I want to answer every single one of them. But I need you to know that giving you up was the biggest mistake of my life, and not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you and wondered if you were happy. She was crying too hard to speak, but she squeezed my hands and nodded. I could see in her eyes that she believed me, that she understood this wasn't some elaborate trick or cruel joke. I also need you to know, I continued, that you're my only heir. Everything I've built, every dollar I've earned, every business I own, it's all going to you someday. You're not just a teacher making $45,000 a year. You're the daughter of one of the richest women in America. The remaining wedding guests were completely absorbed now, probably realizing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Jennifer, I said, turning back to the camera, I want your viewers to understand something important. I could have revealed my identity at any time over the past 22 months. I could have embarrassed this family privately. But I waited until today, until this moment, because I wanted everyone to see how they really treat people when they think those people can't hurt them. I gestured toward Garrett, who is now sitting in one of the reception chairs looking like he might be sick. This family has spent 22 months treating me like I was invisible, making jokes about the help, and acting like my job made me less valuable as a human being. Today, in front of all their friends, they decided to humiliate me one more time. They called me just a maid and said I knew my place. I paused and looked directly at the camera. Well, I do know my place. My place is as the CEO of a company that employs over 3,000 people. My place is as one of the most successful self-made women in America. And my place is as Emma's mother, which is the only title that really matters to me. Jennifer nodded approvingly. And what happens now, Ms. Murphy? What's your plan going forward? Now I'm going to give the Pemberton family a choice, I said, my voice getting more serious. They can acknowledge publicly that they've treated me badly, apologize for their behavior, and promise to do better in the future. If they do that, I'll forgive their mortgage debt and let them keep their house. The remaining wedding guests were dead silent now, maybe 25 people who couldn't bring themselves to leave during such an incredible confrontation. Or, I continued, they can keep acting like they're better than everyone else, and I'll proceed with the foreclosure, call in all their business debts through my network of investors, and make sure that everyone in Connecticut knows exactly what kind of people they really are. It wasn't really a choice at all, and everyone knew it. The Pembertons were completely trapped, and I was the one holding all the cards. Richard was the first to break. He walked over to where I was standing, his face red with embarrassment and probably anger, but smart enough to know he had no other options. Ms. Murphy, he said quietly, we apologize for the way we've treated you. We had no idea who you were, and that's no excuse for our behavior. We were wrong, and we're deeply sorry. Louder, I said. I want everyone here to hear you, and I want it on camera. Richard's voice got stronger. I want everyone here to know that we've treated Rosalind Murphy, our housekeeper, badly, and we're deeply sorry for our behavior. She's been nothing but professional and hardworking, and she deserved much better from our family. Miranda stepped forward next, looking like she wanted to disappear into the ground. I'm sorry too, she said loudly. We were wrong to look down on Rosalind or anyone else who works for us. We have no excuse for our attitude or our behavior. Then it was Garrett's turn. He stood up slowly, his face still pale, his hands still shaking. Of all of them, he looked the most devastated, probably because he'd been the worst to me, and everyone knew it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What was that?" I asked. "I don't think everyone heard you, and the camera definitely didn't pick that up." Garrett cleared his throat and spoke much louder. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I'm sorry for calling you just a maid and acting like you were beneath me. I was wrong, and I'm embarrassed by my behavior. You deserve respect regardless of what job you do." I looked around at the remaining wedding guests, maybe 20 people who were watching this apology with fascination and probably relief that they weren't the ones who had to grovel in front of a news camera. "Thank you," I said simply. "Apology accepted." Then I turned to Jennifer and her camera crew. "I think that's enough for today. Thank you for coming out here and helping me tell this story." Jennifer nodded. "Ms. Murphy, this has been one of the most incredible interviews I've ever conducted. When will this story air?" "You can air it whenever you think it will have the most impact," I said. "But I'd appreciate it if you could mention that Emma had nothing to do with her family's behavior. She's been nothing but kind to me from day one." "Of course. And what about your reunion with your daughter? Will you be available for follow-up interviews?" "Emma and I will need some time to process this and get to know each other. But yes, I'm sure we'll want to share our story eventually." As the news crew packed up their equipment and left, the wedding reception was essentially over. Most of the guests had left during the drama, and the ones who remained were quietly gathering their things and saying awkward goodbyes to the family. Emma and I walked away from the crowd, finding a quiet spot near the garden where we could talk privately. "Is it really true?" she asked, still wiping tears from her eyes. "Are you really my mother?" I pulled out my phone and showed her copies of the documents I'd shared with Jennifer. Photos of her as a baby that I'd received from the adoption agency, copies of the adoption paperwork, business documents that proved everything I'd just told her. "It's all true, sweetheart. Every word of it." She looked at the documents for a long time, then looked back at me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you wait 22 months? "Because I needed to know what kind of person you'd become and what kind of family had raised you. I needed to make sure that revealing the truth wouldn't hurt you or push you away from me forever." Emma nodded slowly. "And what did you find out?" "I found out that you became exactly the kind of person I'd hoped you'd become. Kind, smart, caring about others. You're everything I dreamed you'd be, and more. But I also found out that the people who raised you think they're better than everyone else just because they have money. Except they don't even have money. They're fake rich people who treat real people badly." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we get to know each other. Really know each other. We have 28 years of conversations to catch up on, and I want to hear about every single day of your life." Emma hugged me then, really hugged me, for the first time since she was a baby. And for the first time in 28 years, I felt like my life was complete. The rest of the wedding reception was as awkward as you might imagine. Most of the guests had left by this point, probably eager to get home and start spreading the story of what they'd witnessed. The Pembertons tried to act normal, but everyone could see how shaken they were. Garrett and Vivian's wedding day had been completely ruined, and I have to admit, I felt pretty good about that. They'd spent months planning this expensive celebration to show off their wealth and status, and instead it had become the day when everyone found out they were broke and terrible people. Over the next few weeks, the story exploded across social media and the news. The video of my revelation went viral, with millions of people watching the moment when I revealed my true identity to the shocked wedding guests. The headlines were everything I could have hoped for. Billionaire housekeeper exposes family's true colors. The most expensive wedding revenge ever. You'll never believe what this maid did to her employers. The Pemberton family became a laughingstock in Greenwich society. Their friends stopped inviting them to parties, Their business clients started canceling contracts, and everywhere they went, people recognized them as the family who'd been humiliated by their own housekeeper. But the best part was watching Emma discover her true heritage. I took her to my corporate headquarters in Denver, showed her the business empire she'd inherit someday, and introduced her to the hundreds of people who worked for companies she'd own. She was amazed by everything, but she handled it with the same grace and intelligence she'd always shown. We spent hours talking about her childhood, her dreams, her plans for the future. I learned that she'd always felt like something was missing from her life, like there was a piece of her story that didn't make sense. Now she understood why. I also learned that the Pembertons had told her that her birth mother was a drug addict who'd abandoned her. They'd made up this whole story about how they'd saved her from a terrible life, and Emma had believed it because she had no reason not to. Finding out that her birth mother was actually a successful businesswoman who'd been looking for her for 28 years changed everything Emma thought she knew about herself and her origins. As for the Pemberton family, I kept my promise. I forgave their mortgage debt and let them keep their house, but I made it clear that our relationship was over. I would always be polite if I saw them around town, but I would never forget how they'd treated me when they thought I was powerless. Garrett's marriage to Vivian lasted exactly 3 months. Apparently, being publicly humiliated and losing all their social status wasn't the foundation for a strong relationship. She left him for someone with actual money and a better reputation. Richard and Miranda's business did go bankrupt, just like I'd predicted. Without their fake wealthy image to attract clients, they couldn't compete in their industry. They had to sell most of their possessions and downsize to a much smaller house. They went from acting like royalty to living like regular middle-class people, which was probably good for their character. Emma quit her teaching job and came to work with me, learning the family business and preparing to take over someday. She was brilliant at it, just like I'd hoped she'd be. She had my head for numbers and strategy, but she also had a kindness and empathy that made her even better at managing people than I was. We bought a house together in Greenwich, close enough to my corporate offices, but far enough from the Pembertons to give everyone space to heal. Emma kept her last name, but she also started using Murphy as her middle name, which made me happier than I could express. 6 months after the wedding, I got a letter from Garrett. It was full of apologies and explanations about how sorry he was and how he'd learned from his mistakes. He asked if there was any way I could help him find a job, since his reputation in Connecticut was completely destroyed. I wrote back with a simple message. Dear Garrett, thank you for your letter. I'm glad to hear that you're reflecting on your behavior and trying to become a better person. However, I think it's important for you to rebuild your life through your own efforts, just like I did when I was young and had nothing. The best way to show that you've really changed is to work hard, treat people with respect, and prove through your actions that you've learned your lesson. Best of luck with your future endeavors. Sincerely, Rosalind Murphy. I never heard from him again, which was fine with me. The media attention eventually died down, but the story of the billionaire housekeeper became one of those internet legends that people still talk about and share. I got thousands of messages from people all over the world, telling me their own stories about being underestimated or mistreated by people who thought they were better. Some of those messages were from other wealthy people who'd done similar things, pretending to be ordinary workers to see how they'd be treated. It turns out I wasn't the only rich person who'd gotten tired of how some people act when they think money makes them superior. But most of the messages were from regular working people who said my story gave them hope and made them feel like their dignity mattered, even when other people tried to make them feel small. That meant more to me than any business success I'd ever achieved. Emma and I started a scholarship program for young mothers who wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it. We called it the Second Chances Program, and it was funded entirely by my personal wealth. We didn't make a big deal about it in the media, but we helped hundreds of women get the education they needed to build better lives for themselves and their children. Every time we awarded one of those scholarships, I thought about the young mother I'd been 28 years ago, scared and alone, and convinced I couldn't provide for my daughter. If someone had helped me back then, maybe Emma, and I never would have been separated in the first place. But then again, if we hadn't been separated, I might never have built the business empire that eventually let me give her everything she could ever want. Maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. Today, as I sit in my office looking out at the Connecticut countryside, I think about how different my life is now compared to 22 months ago. Back then, I was alone, pretending to be someone I wasn't, watching from the sidelines as other people lived their lives. Now I have my daughter back, I have a business partner who's also my family, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that I stood up to people who thought they could treat me badly just because of who they thought I was. The Pemberton family taught me something important. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how successful you become, there will always be people who judge you based on appearances and assumptions. But it also doesn't matter what those people think, as long as you know who you really are and what you're really worth. Emma is sitting across from me right now, reviewing contracts for our latest renewable energy project. She's wearing a beautiful business suit that costs more than most people make in a month, but she still has the same kind heart and humble spirit that made me proud of her when I thought she was just the Pembertons' adopted daughter. She looks up from her papers and smiles at me. "Mom," she says, and that word still makes my heart skip a beat every time I hear it. "I was thinking we should do something special for our second Mother's Day together." "What did you have in mind?" I ask. "Well," she says with a mischievous grin, "I thought maybe we could visit that coffee shop where I heard Miranda is working and see how she treats her customers." I laugh out loud. "Emma Murphy, you are definitely my daughter." "Speaking of which," she says, "I got another message from someone who saw our story online. A woman in California whose rich employers have been treating her badly. She wants to know if we have any advice." "What kind of employers?" "Tech company founders who think they're better than everyone else." Sound familiar? We both laugh, remembering our own experience with arrogant rich people who forgot that money doesn't make you a better person. "Tell her to document everything," I say. "Keep records of how they treat her, what they say, how they act when they think no one important is watching. You never know when that information might come in handy." Emma nods and types a response on her phone. Should we tell her about the satisfaction of watching terrible people get exactly what they deserve? Let's just say that patience and planning can lead to very interesting results. Is that something you learned in business school?
No, sweetheart.
That's something I learned from losing you and getting you back. Nothing else matters as much as the people you love. Emma reaches over and squeezes my hand. "I love you too, Mom." And in that moment, sitting in my office with my daughter, talking about helping other people who are being treated badly, I realize that my life is absolutely perfect. Not because of the money or the business success or even the satisfaction of getting revenge on people who deserved it. My life is perfect because I have Emma back, and everything else is just details. The Pembertons had taught me that money doesn't make you a good person, but they'd also accidentally taught me that love and family are the only things that really matter. For that lesson, I was actually grateful, even if they'd had to learn their own lesson the hard way. Last month, I ran into Miranda at a coffee shop in downtown Greenwich. She was working behind the counter, wearing a uniform that looked a lot like the one I used to wear when I cleaned her house. When she saw me, she looked embarrassed and tried to avoid eye contact. But I walked over to her with a genuine smile. "Hello, Miranda. How are you doing?" She looked surprised that I was being friendly. "I'm fine, thank you, Emma, and I just got back from opening our new wind farm in Texas. We're creating about 400 new jobs." Miranda nodded awkwardly, probably not sure how to respond to casual conversation with someone she used to order around. "Miranda," I said gently, "I hope you know that I don't hold any grudges. What happened at the wedding was about teaching a lesson, not about being cruel." I hope your family is doing well." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for not taking our house. We know you could have destroyed us completely." "Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow," I told her. "I hope this experience has helped your family become kinder people." She nodded vigorously. "It has. We've all learned a lot about treating people with respect, regardless of their job or background. Garrett especially has changed a lot. He's working 2 jobs now and volunteering at a homeless shelter on weekends." "I'm glad to hear that. He wanted me to tell you, if I ever saw you, that he's truly sorry for how he treated you. He knows he can't undo what he did, but he's trying to become a better person." "That's all any of us can do," I said. "Learn from our mistakes and try to do better." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The revenge had been satisfying, but this moment of forgiveness felt even better. Emma was waiting for me in the car, and when I told her about the conversation, she smiled proudly. "You're a better person than I am," she said. "I'm not sure I could have been that gracious." "Revenge is satisfying in the moment," I told her, "but grace and forgiveness last forever." "Is that something you learned from building your business empire?" "That's something I learned from being your mother. Even when I didn't know where you were, even when I thought I might never see you again, loving you made me want to be a better person." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well, you succeeded. You're the best person I know." "That's because you bring out the best in me. You always have, even when you were just a baby." We drove home in comfortable silence, both of us thinking about how far we'd come and how much our lives had changed. 28 years ago, I was a scared teenager who thought giving up my baby was the only way to give her a good life. Now I was a successful businesswoman who'd found her daughter and built a relationship that was stronger than anything money could buy. The Pembertons had tried to make me feel small and insignificant, but they'd actually given me the greatest gift of all. They'd given me the opportunity to show Emma exactly what kind of person I really was and what kind of people they really were. In trying to humiliate me, they'd revealed their own true character. And in standing up to them, I'd shown Emma that her birth mother wasn't the weak, desperate woman they'd described. I was someone who'd built an empire, who commanded respect, and who would fight for the people she loved. That night, Emma and I cooked dinner together and talked about our plans for the future. We were going to expand our renewable energy projects, grow our scholarship program, and maybe write a book about our experience. But mostly, we were just going to enjoy being a family. After 28 years apart, we had a lot of time to make up for. "Mom," Emma said as we were cleaning up after dinner, "do you ever regret the way things happened? Do you ever wish you'd just told me who you were from the beginning?" I thought about it carefully. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken a different approach. But then I remember that day at the wedding when you saw exactly how the Pembertons treated people they thought were beneath them. If I'd revealed my identity earlier, you might never have seen that side of them. And I might have spent the rest of my life feeling torn between 2 families. Exactly. This way, you got to see everyone's true character before you had to make any choices. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Plus, the look on Garrett's face when he realized he'd been calling a billionaire just a maid was absolutely priceless. We both started laughing, remembering that perfect moment of shock and horror when the truth finally hit him. "You know what the best part was?" I said. "It wasn't the money or the power or even the satisfaction of proving them wrong. The best part was watching you realize that your birth mother wasn't ashamed of you or trying to get rid of you. The best part was seeing you understand that I'd been looking for you your whole life." Emma hugged me tightly. That was the best part for me too. Finding out that someone had been missing me for 28 years, someone who'd built an entire business empire partly because losing me motivated her to work so hard. I would have given up every penny to have you back sooner. I know, but I'm glad things happened the way they did. Now I get to have a mother who's also a role model, someone who shows me what it means to be strong and successful, and kind all at the same time. As we finished cleaning up and got ready for bed, I reflected on how perfectly everything had worked out. The Pembertons had spent 22 months treating me like I was invisible, never realizing they were living with one of the most powerful women in America. Their arrogance and cruelty had been their downfall, but it had also been my opportunity. By treating me badly when they thought I was powerless, they'd shown Emma exactly what kind of people they really were. And by standing up to them when I finally revealed my true identity, I'd shown Emma what kind of person I really was. The story had gone viral not just because it was dramatic, but because it was a perfect example of why you should never judge people based on their appearance or their job. You never know who you're really dealing with, and treating everyone with respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Emma and I had turned our reunion into a teaching moment for millions of people around the world. We'd shown that dignity matters, that hard work deserves respect, and that underestimating people based on their circumstances can lead to very unpleasant surprises. But most importantly, we'd shown that love and family are more powerful than money or status, or any of the things that people use to try to make themselves feel superior to others. The Pembertons had thought they were better than their housekeeper, but they'd ended up learning that their housekeeper was better than them in every way that mattered. And Emma and I had gotten our fairy tale ending, complete with a business empire, a loving relationship, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes good people really do win in the end. A year later, Channel 8 News did a follow-up story on us. Jennifer Martinez came to our new house to interview Emma and me about how our relationship had developed and what we'd learned from the experience. "Ms. Murphy," Jennifer asked, "looking back on everything that happened, do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" "Only one," I said, holding Emma's hand. "I regret that it took me 28 years to find my daughter. But I don't regret anything about how I revealed the truth. The Pembertons needed to learn that lesson, and Emma needed to see who they really were." "And Emma, how has your life changed since discovering your mother's true identity?" Emma smiled. "It's been incredible. Not just because of the money, but because I finally understand where I came from. I know now that my birth mother didn't abandon me because she didn't want me. She lost me because she thought she couldn't take care of me, and then she spent almost 30 years building an empire so she could give me everything when she found me again." What advice would you give to other families dealing with adoption or difficult family relationships? I thought carefully before answering. I'd say that love is more important than money, truth is more important than comfort, and treating people with kindness and respect is the most important thing of all. You never know what someone else is going through or what they're capable of. And always remember, Emma added, that just because someone works for you doesn't mean they're less important than you. Everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their job title. Jennifer nodded. "Finally, what's next for you both?" "We're expanding our scholarship program," I said. "We want to help more young mothers get the education they need to build better lives for themselves and their children. And we're writing a book about our experience, with all the proceeds going to organizations that help families affected by adoption." "But mostly," Emma said, "we're just enjoying being a family. We have a lot of lost time to make up for." As the interview wrapped up and Jennifer's crew packed their equipment, I looked around at our beautiful home and thought about how different everything was from that day at the wedding. The Pemberton family had tried to humiliate me by calling me just a maid, in front of 200 people. Instead, they'd given me the perfect opportunity to show the world exactly who I really was and to reunite with the daughter I'd been searching for my entire adult life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about rising so far above them that their cruelty becomes irrelevant, and their attempts to hurt you actually end up making your life better than they ever could have imagined. The Pembertons thought they knew who I was when they saw me cleaning their house and serving their guests. But they didn't know anything about the woman who'd built a mining empire from nothing, who'd turned personal tragedy into incredible success, and who never stopped fighting for the people she loved. They called me just a maid, but I was so much more than that. I was a mother, a businesswoman, a fighter, and a survivor. And now, thanks to their own arrogance and cruelty, the whole world knew it too. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of hidden identity, family reunion, and the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community of women who refuse to be underestimated. Remember, you never know who you're really dealing with, so treat everyone with kindness and respect. Because sometimes, the person you're looking down on might just be the person who could change your entire world. And sometimes, that change might not be the kind you were hoping for. Until next time, this is Her True Stories, where truth really is stranger than fiction.